Hello everyone, my name is Jamila Gonzalez and today I'll be discussing the effects of smoking hookah and how does it compare to smoking a cigarette. While both forms of tobacco consumption involve nicotine and involve combustion of tobacco, the methods of inhalation, exposure duration, and the chemical profiles of the smoke will differ significantly. Due to that, they lead to distinct health effects and pharmacokinetic differences. One of the biggest differences between hookah and a cigarette smoking is the duration and volume of smoking held. A typical cigarette is smoked for about 5 to 7 minutes, which will deliver a estimate of about 10 to 12 puffs, and a total inhaled volume of smoke of about 500 to 600 milliliters of smoke. In contrast, a single hookah session, which will last about 45 to 60 minutes, during which a user may take 100 to 200 puffs, with each puff delivering 150 to 300 milliliters of smoke. This will result in a total of about 90,000 milliliters per session, equivalent to smoking about 100 cigarettes. As a result, hookah smokers are exposed to a significantly higher quantity of smoke and toxicants over a long period of time. Here on the left, we can see a diagram of how the hookah machine looks. Although nicotine is present in both hookah and cigarette smoke, the pattern of delivery will differ. Hookah smoke undergoes water filtration, which cools down the smoke and allows for different inhalation and prolonged puffing. While some may assume that this filtration of the water reduces the harm, the reality is that the water would have no effect in removing the nicotine or any other harmful chemicals in it. Consequently, despite the perception of a smoother and less harsh smoking experience, hookah smokers often absorb comparable or even higher levels of nicotine than a cigarette smoker would. This contributes to high levels of addiction and dependence. A critical difference between hookah and cigarette smoke is carbon monoxide exposure. The charcoal used to heat hookah tobacco, which is named shisha, produces a significant amount of carbon monoxide. Hookah smokers can have carbon monoxide levels five to 10 times higher than those of a cigarette smoker, even after a single session. Increased carbon monoxide exposure will impair oxygen transport, leading to hypoxia and even cardiovascular stress. When comparing carbon monoxide exposure between cigarettes and hookah, we can see that hookah has a lot higher negative effect in the body than a cigarette would. In hookah, the primary carbon monoxide source is from burning the charcoal used to heat the tobacco. As previously mentioned, high levels of carbon monoxide in the body would be very high even after a single 1 hour session. Carbon monoxide in a hookah session equals to the same of about smoking 20 cigarettes. High carbon monoxide due to hookah intake will cause symptoms such as headache, dizziness, and even cardiovascular stress. In contrast, carbon monoxide in cigarettes is produced directly from the combustion of the tobacco. Carbon monoxide levels will be high when using a cigarette, especially during the process of inhalation, but they will be typically lower than when using hookah. Symptoms of high carbon monoxide will be the same as when using hookah, but they will generally show lower acute exposure per session. Additionally, hookah smoke contains higher levels of PHAs, which are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, heavy metals, and volatile inorganic compounds. All of them will contribute to the high carcinogen risk of hookah. There are other ingredients of hookah. Hookah can be often mixed with molasses, glycerin, and flavoring agents, which will alter the chemical compounds of the smoke. These additives generate additional toxic byproducts when heated. The flavoring agents, often perceived as harmless, these are some of the flavoring agents that we can commonly see being used in hookah. Unlike cigarettes, where regulatory restrictions on flavors have been implemented, flavor shisha remains widely available. This contributes to increased initiation, prolonged use, and particularly among younger patients, they would technically see it as a more approachable option since that it has more flavors. Another often overlooked consequence of hookah use is the risk of infectious diseases. Hookah sessions are frequently social with multiple users sharing the same mouthpiece. Even though the mouthpiece can be disposable, improper cleaning of the hookah hoses and equipment can harbor bacteria, viruses, which would lead to increased risk of respiratory and systemic infections. Some commonly associated infections include herpes simplex virus, which is obtained via sharing the mouthpiece of the hookah. Also, tuberculosis, which is obtained through aerosol droplets if shared with another person that has the disease. There's also hepatitis B and C, which is potentially spread when the equipment is contaminated or if it wasn't properly cleaned. The Helicobacteria pylori, which is a bacterium linked to stomach ulcer, can also be transmitted through hookahs and is transmitted orally. And respiratory infections such as influenza, mycoplasma, and COVID-19 can be transmitted and they're transmitted through saliva and droplets. Cigarette smoking generally does not involve sharing, so infectious diseases are typically less common. But if cigars are shared, herpes simplex or respiratory infections can be transmitted. Lastly, we'll be discussing the risk for cardiovascular and pulmonary implications. Hookah smoking, like cigarette smoking, increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, COPD, and even cancer. However, the prolonged duration of exposure, higher smoke volume in hookah use may amplify the risk for these diseases. Studies have shown that frequent hookah use can lead to impaired endothelial function, increased arterial stiffness, and heightened oxidative stress. All of this will contribute to cardiovascular pathology. There are also some pulmonary effects which include reduced lung function, chronic bronchitis, and increased risk for respiratory infections, as we had spoke on the last slide. Cigarette smoking also has a high risk factor for cardiovascular disease, COPD, and lung cancer. The regular and often use of cigarettes introduces a steady stream of toxic chemicals into the respiratory system. This would damage, chemicals damage the respiratory system and will also affect the cardiovascular system. A study has shown that cigarette smoking impairs arterial function, increases arterial stiffness, and promotes oxidative stress. All of them will contribute to arteriosclerosis. On the pulmonary side, cigarette smokers leads to declines in lung function, the development of chronic bronchitis, and a very high risk for respiratory infections and cancer. While hookah and cigarette smoking share a lot of similarities, delivering nicotine and inducing dependence, the difference in smoke volume, exposure duration, and carbon monoxide levels make hookah smoking potentially more harmful than cigarettes. The perception that hookah smoking is less harmful due to water filtration can be cultural, but it's also a misconception that fails to account for the prolonged exposure of toxicants and even an increased health risk. As research continues, it has become increasingly clear that hookah smoking carries its own dangerous side effects that should not be underestimated.